Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comments section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Pedro Rodriguez Filho was born on a farm in a small city called Santa Rita do Sapucaí, in the state of Minas Gerais, Brazil, on October 29, 1954. His life began in a violent way. Before he was born, his father kicked his pregnant mother in the belly during an argument. This hurt Pedro's head while he was still inside her womb. He came into the world with a bruised skull because of his father's action. Pedro grew up in a poor and troubled home. His family life was not stable. His father worked as a security guard at a local school. His mother took care of the home, but there was always fighting and anger between his parents. As a child, Pedro saw and heard many fights. This was normal life for him. When Pedro was 13 years old, something happened that showed his violent nature for the first time. He got into a fight with an older cousin. During the fight, his cousin punched him in the face, and Pedro fell to the ground. While he was on the ground, looking up at his cousin, he spoke in a calm but serious voice. He told his cousin, "I'm going to kill you." His cousin did not believe him. He just laughed at the threat. Pedro was serious. Later, he pushed that same cousin into a machine used for pressing sugar cane. The machine almost tore the cousin's arm off. Then Pedro pulled out a knife and pointed it at him. The cousin screamed for help. Other family members heard the screams and ran to help. They stopped Pedro before he could hurt his cousin more. Because of this attack, Pedro faced consequences from his family. They now knew he was capable of doing terrible things. By the age of 14, Pedro was not living a normal teenage life. He was angry, and he acted on his anger. He did not go to school regularly. He spent his time watching people and thinking about revenge for small problems. He was especially close to his father. He watched how the people in the town treated his father. He paid attention to any trouble his father faced. Then, a specific event pushed Pedro to act. His father, the school guard, was accused of stealing food from the school kitchen. Because of this accusation, the deputy mayor of the city fired him. Not only that, but his father was also put in jail for the crime. Pedro believed his father was innocent. He thought the real thief was another security guard who worked at the school. This made Pedro very angry. He decided to take action himself. He went to his grandfather's house and took his shotgun without asking. He did not tell anyone what he was planning. He just took the gun and left. This was the point where his young life of anger and small violent acts was about to turn into something much bigger. He was now 14 years old, armed, and ready to use the gun. Pedro walked to the city hall of Santa Rita do Sapucaí carrying his grandfather's shotgun. He was only 14 years old. He waited outside the building until he saw the deputy mayor, the man who had fired his father and put him in jail. When the deputy mayor appeared, Pedro raised the shotgun and fired. He shot him right there in front of the city hall. The man fell to the ground. Pedro did not wait to see if he was dead. He turned and left quickly. But Pedro was not finished. He believed another security guard at the school was the real thief who stole the food. So he went to find that guard. When he found him, he shot him too. Now Pedro had shot 2 people. He knew the police would look for him, so he ran away from his hometown. He went to a large city near Sao Paulo called Mogi das Cruzes. He was now a fugitive. In Mogi das Cruzes, Pedro needed to survive. He was young and had no job and no money. He started to rob places where drug dealers sold their drugs. He would go into these places, steal their money and drugs, and then kill the traffickers. He did this many times. The people in the area heard about these killings. They started to call him Padrinho Matador, which means Little Pedro the Killer. Some people saw him as a hero because he was killing criminals. The news media also began to report on him. While living in Maggie das Cruzes, Pedro met a young woman. Her name was Maria Aparecida Olympia. People called her Botinha. They started living together as a couple. Maria had been married before. Her husband was a leader of a local gang that sold drugs. But he had died. When Pedro moved in with Maria, he took over the duties of her dead husband. This made him a part of the gang. Because he was now in the gang, Pedro had problems with other criminals. He was forced to deal with 3 men who used to work with Maria's husband. These men were now rivals. Pedro killed all 3 of them. His life was now fully involved in crime and violence. Maria became pregnant with Pedro's child. Pedro was happy about this, but the happiness did not last long. A leader from a different rival gang wanted to hurt Pedro. He could not find Pedro, so he went after Maria instead. He killed her. She was murdered while she was pregnant with Pedro's baby. Pedro was still a teenager when Maria was killed. He was filled with a deep need for revenge. He decided to find every single person in the rival gang that killed Maria. He tracked them down one by one. He did not stop until he had killed every member of that gang. This was a long and bloody series of killings. He acted alone, finding them and killing them without mercy. When Pedro was 18 years old, something happened with his parents. His father and mother were still fighting. One day, his father stabbed his mother. He stabbed her 21 times, and she died from her wounds. Pedro's father was arrested for this murder and sent to prison. Years later, when Pedro was 20 years old, he was also in the same prison system. He claimed that he found his father inside the prison. Pedro said he killed his father there. He said he stabbed him 22 times. He explained that he stabbed him one more time than his father had stabbed his mother. He also said he cut out a piece of his father's heart, chewed it, and threw it away. He said this was his revenge for his mother's death. However, some people who later studied his life do not believe this story happened this way. They say his father actually died years later in prison from a breathing disease, not from being stabbed by his son. But Pedro always told the story as if it was true. Whether it was true or not, it became part of the legend around him. After all these killings, Pedro continued his life of crime. He killed more people. He killed drug dealers. He killed people he believed were rapists. He killed criminals. He said he only killed people who he thought deserved to die. By the time he was 18, he had already committed many murders. But soon, the police would finally catch up with him. On May 24, 1973, when Pedro was 18 years old, the police finally caught him. He was arrested for the first time. He was taken to prison. This was the start of a very long time behind bars. While he was in prison, something happened that showed how violent he still was. He was being moved from one place to another in a police vehicle. There was another prisoner in the vehicle with him. Both men had their hands chained together. During the trip, Pedro killed the other man. He did this quietly, right next to the police officers in the front seat. The officers did not notice anything was wrong until they opened the door at the end of the trip. When they saw the other prisoner was dead, Pedro explained his action. He said he killed the man because the man was a rapist. This did not lead to a new trial at that moment, but it was another murder added to his record. Over the years, police and courts studied all the killings Pedro had done. They connected him to many murders. In official records, he was sentenced for 71 murders. He himself always claimed he killed over 100 people. The court gave him a very long sentence. He was sentenced to 126 years in prison. But Brazilian law had a rule. The rule said no person could stay in prison for more than 30 years. This meant that even though he was sentenced to 126 years, he would not stay that long. Because of this law, he was scheduled to be let out in the year 2003. He had first been arrested in 1973, so 30 years later was 2003. Around this time, before he was released, an American author named Jeff Lindsay learned about Pedro's story. He read about this man in Brazil who killed other criminals, especially killers and rapists. Lindsay was working on a book. He used Pedro's story as the main idea for a new character. That character was a man who worked with the police during the day, but hunted and killed bad people at night. The character's name was Dexter Morgan. The first book came out in 2004. Later, a TV show was made about Dexter. The show became very famous around the world. Because of this, many years later, people started calling Pedro the Brazilian Dexter. Pedro was not released in 2003 as planned. There were delays and other legal issues. He finally walked out of prison on April 24, 2007. He had been inside for 34 years. He was 52 years old. After his release, he moved to a city in northern Brazil called Fortaleza. But his freedom did not last forever. On September 15, 2011, police arrested him again. This time it was not for killing someone on the street. While he was in prison during his first sentence, he had been involved in a riot. He and other prisoners had also held some people against their will inside the prison. For these crimes, a court sentenced him to 8 more years. He went back to prison. Pedro behaved well during this second sentence. Because of his good behavior, he was released early on December 10, 2018. He had served 7 of the 8 years. After this second release, Pedro said he was finished with violence. He said he was an old man and wanted a new life. He started a YouTube channel. He called it Padrinho Ex Matador, which means ex-killer Petey. On his channel, he talked about crimes that were in the news. He gave his opinions. He told young people not to follow the path of crime. He said he was not proud of the things he did. Many people watched his videos. He became a local celebrity in his neighborhood. On the morning of March 5, 2023, Pedro was in the city of Mogi das Cruzes. This was the same city he had run to when he was 14 years old. He was standing on a sidewalk. He was holding a small child in his arms. A black car drove up. 3 men inside the car started shooting at him. Pedro was hit by the bullets and fell. Then one of the men got out of the car. He walked over to Pedro and used a knife to cut his throat. The cut was very deep. Then the men drove away in 2 cars, one black and one white. The child in Pedro's arms was not hurt. Police arrived quickly, but Pedro was already dead. They later found one of the cars used in the attack. But they did not find the men who did it. No one was ever arrested for his murder. The identity of the killers and the reason for the attack remain unknown. His life, which began with violence before he was born, ended with violence on a sidewalk in Mogi das Cruzes. Story 2. Francisco de Assis Pereira was born on November 29, 1967, in the huge city of Sao Paulo, Brazil. He grew up in a poor family in a simple neighborhood. Life was not easy for him as a child. When he was young, a terrible thing happened to him. He was sexually abused by his own aunt. This event deeply affected him and caused problems in his mind. After this experience, he began to have a strange and strong fixation on women's breasts. This was an early sign that something was not right, but he kept it hidden. As he grew into a young man, Francisco got a job. He became a motorcycle courier. His job was to deliver documents and packages around the busy city on his motorcycle. He was good at his job and knew the streets of Sao Paulo very well. Later, he had another experience that shaped his dark thoughts. His female boss at work seduced him into having sexual relationships with men. In one of these relationships, a man hurt him very badly. This man almost tore off Francisco's penis. After this attack, Francisco lived in fear of losing his reproductive organs. He also felt physical pain during any sexual act. He could no longer feel pleasure. This lack of pleasure and his deep anger would later become a very important reason for his actions. Even before he committed any major crimes, Francisco showed that he could be violent. He lived for more than a year with a travesti named Thena. During their time together, Francisco was physically abusive. He punched Thena in the stomach and slapped her in the face. This violence was not new. It was a pattern of behavior that he would use against other women later. In his daily life, Francisco seemed like a normal person. He was a hard worker, but he was also very good at talking to people. He was extroverted and convincing. People trusted him easily. He used this skill to learn about others. He would listen to women he met and ask about their lives, especially their problems. He paid close attention to women who looked sad, lonely, or who were having trouble in their relationships. He saw these women as easy targets. Using his job as a motorcycle courier, Francisco began to hunt for victims. He spent his days driving around the city, but he was not just making deliveries. He was looking for women. His favorite place to find them was near the Jabbaquara bus terminal. This was a busy place with many people coming and going. He would watch the crowds, looking for a specific type of woman. He looked for women who seemed sad, lonely, or troubled. He called them the ones with their head low. He believed these women would be easier to trick and control. When he found a woman who seemed right, he would approach her. He was always friendly and calm. He had a simple but effective lie. He told them he was a talent scout for a big, famous cosmetics company. He said he was looking for beautiful women to be in photo shoots and become models. He promised them money and a chance at a better life. Many women, especially those who were unhappy with their current lives, were interested. To make himself seem even more real and trustworthy, he would listen to their problems. If a woman talked about a fight with her boyfriend or feeling sad, he would act sympathetic. He used their own words to make them feel like he understood them. This was his trick. He used their sadness to gain their trust. Once a woman agreed to go with him, he would invite her onto the back of his motorcycle. He told her he was taking her to a test photo shoot. He would then drive them to the state park, a large, forested area on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet and isolated place. He knew the park well. When they arrived at a remote spot deep in the trees, he would stop the motorcycle. It was then that his true intentions became clear. In the isolated woods, there was no one to hear them scream. In the park, he would attack the women. He would first rape them. After the assault, he would murder them. His preferred weapon was a simple shoelace. He would use it to strangle them to death. He did this to at least 11 women. Their names were Elisangela, Raquel, Selma, Patricia, and others. One of his victims, a young woman named Selma Ferreira Queiroz, was only a teenager. After he killed her, he even called her sister and pretended to be a kidnapper, asking for money. This showed how cruel and calculating he was. Not all of his attacks ended in murder. 9 other women survived his attacks. They were assaulted but managed to escape or were left for dead and later found alive. These survivors all told similar stories. They described how a friendly man on a motorcycle had offered them a modeling job and then attacked them in the park. One detail they all remembered was that he would sometimes bite them during the assault. During this time, a small mistake happened. One day, Francisco approached a girl, but she could not go with him right away. He gave her a business card so she could call him later. The card had a name, Jean, on it, but it also had the real name and phone number of the courier company where he worked. The girl did not go with him, but she kept the card. She thought the whole situation was strange. At his workplace, people also began to notice small changes. His boss saw that Francisco was acting differently in a strange way. Then one day, Francisco simply did not come to work. He left a note on the table. In the note, he said his time there was over, and he was sorry for leaving so suddenly. He did not say where he was going. He just disappeared. He left the note and a newspaper on the table and fled the city, heading south to the state of Rio Grande do Sul. He thought he could escape and start a new life. After Francisco fled Sao Paulo, he traveled south to the state of Rio Grande do Sul. He ended up in a small city called Itaqui. There, he met a kind fisherman named João Carlos Villaverde. Francisco told the fisherman he was just a traveler passing through. João felt sorry for him and offered him a place to stay. Francisco accepted, thinking he was safe and hidden in this quiet, faraway place. Meanwhile, back in Sao Paulo, the police were working hard on the case. They had statements from the women who survived. These survivors all described the same man and his trick with the modeling job. The police created a sketch of the suspect based on their descriptions. They also had the business card that Francisco had given to the girl he approached near the Jabaquara terminal. The card led them directly to the courier company where Francisco used to work. When the police went to the company, his boss told them that Francisco had already quit and left town. But the boss gave the police the note Francisco had left behind. He also gave them the newspaper that was on the table. The police checked everything. They were now sure that Francisco de Assis Pereira was the man they were looking for. His face and name were all over the news. He was the most wanted man in Brazil. A huge manhunt began to find him. Hundreds of miles away in Itaqui, Francisco was still staying with the fishermen. One evening, João Carlos Villaverde was watching television. A news program came on, showing the face of the park maniac and explaining the terrible crimes he had committed in Sao Paulo. João looked at the screen, then he looked at the man staying in his home. He realized with shock that the man on TV was sitting right there in his living room. The next morning, João quietly went to the police and reported him. On August 4th, 1998, after 23 days on the run, the police arrived at the fisherman's house and arrested Francisco de Assis Pereira without a fight. He was brought back to Sao Paulo. During the investigation, the police asked him about all his victims. He confessed to the murders and the attacks. He even led the police to a specific spot in the state park where they found the bones of Selma Ferreira Queiroz, the teenage victim whose body had not yet been discovered. At his trial, the courtroom was full of the families of the victims. They listened as the survivors told their stories and as the evidence was presented. Francisco was found guilty of 11 murders and 9 attempted murders. The judge sentenced him to a total of 268 years in prison. In an interview after his arrest, he tried to explain his actions. He said he felt he had a good side and a dark side that he could not control. He also made a shocking claim. He said that just before he was caught, he was starting to think about eating the flesh of his victims. He was sent to a special prison in Taubaté for criminals with mental health problems. In 2000, there was a riot at the prison where other inmates tried to kill him. 4 inmates died in that riot, but Francisco survived. He was then moved to another psychiatric facility for his own safety. Even in prison, Francisco continued to receive attention. He got many letters from women who admired him. One of these women, named Jacera, became his wife after writing to him for a long time. They later separated. According to Brazilian law, a person cannot stay in prison for more than 30 years. Because of this, Francisco de Assis Pereira is scheduled to be released from prison in the year 2028. For the families of Elisangela, Raquel, Selma, Patricia, and the other 7 women he killed, the pain of their loss will never go away. Story 3. Roberto Wagner Fernandes was born in Brazil on April 26, 1965. As a young man, he trained to become a pilot. He got his license and worked flying planes. To the people who knew him in his city of Londrina, he seemed like a polite and friendly man. He married a woman named Danielle. She was a teacher. They had a daughter together. To their neighbors and friends, they looked like a normal family who took care of their child. But their marriage had problems that others could not see. In the mid-1990s, Roberto began seeing prostitutes. This was a secret he kept from his wife. His behavior with these women was sometimes violent. During one meeting with a prostitute, he drank a lot of whiskey and used cocaine. He became very aggressive. He started to kick and punch the woman. He hit her with a water bottle. Then, he tried to drown her in the motel room's bathtub. The woman was able to fight free and open the door. When she opened the door, Roberto stopped immediately and became calm. He told her to get dressed, and they both left. Later, the woman called him about a check he had given her. She later told the police about this attack, describing his sudden, explosive violence. This hidden behavior and his violence toward the prostitute were serious red flags, but they were not known to his family and friends. His wife still did not know about his double life. On the early morning of November 18, 1996, the secret life and the marriage came together with violence. Neighbors in their apartment building heard a loud fight coming from Roberto and Danielle's home. They heard arguing, and then they heard gunshots, at least 6 of them. When the police arrived, Roberto had already left in his car. He took his 5-year-old daughter with him. The police chased him and arrested him. Inside the apartment, they found Danielle. She had been shot. She was rushed to the hospital, but she died from her injuries. The murder shocked the community. Everyone thought Roberto and Danielle were a nice, polite couple. At his trial, the reason for the fight came out. Danielle had found out that Roberto was cheating on her with a prostitute. Roberto claimed that during the fight, Danielle threatened him with a gun, and he accidentally shot her in a panic. But the prostitute from the earlier motel attack came forward to the police. She told them about the violent attack where Roberto tried to drown her. Roberto and his lawyers tried to discredit her, saying she was lying to get more money. They said Danielle was drunk that night. The court case was confusing, with different stories. In the end, the jury found Roberto not guilty of murder. He was acquitted because the evidence against him was not strong enough to prove he was guilty beyond a doubt. The trial was over, but the story did not end there. Danielle's family was very angry about the verdict. People said they were so angry they wanted to hire someone to kill Roberto. Whether this was true or not, Roberto believed his life was in danger. He decided he had to leave Brazil and start over somewhere new. He left his past behind and moved to the United States, to a city called Miami in Florida. When Roberto Wagner Fernandez arrived in Miami, Florida, he tried to build a new life. He found work first as a bus driver for a touring company. Then he got a job as a flight attendant at the Miami International Airport. To the people he worked with, he seemed like a normal man doing normal jobs. But his old habits from Brazil did not stay in the past. He continued to pay for sex with prostitutes. This was the same behavior that had led to violence before. In the year 2000, the bodies of women began to appear in and around Miami. The first was found on June 24th. 2 people were driving along Flamingo Road near a town called Cooper City. They saw a suitcase on the side of the road. When they opened it, they found the naked body of a woman inside. The police identified her as Kim Dietz Livesey. She was 35 years old. Kim had a history of problems with alcohol and drugs. She also had been arrested before for prostitution. Her friends knew her from groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. They were shocked by her death. The police asked the public for help, but no strong leads came. The case grew cold. No one knew who had put her in that suitcase. The second body was found on August 9, 2000, less than 2 months later. People walking near Dania Beach found a duffel bag left by the road. Inside the bag was the body of a woman named Cia Demas. She was a prostitute. She had been strangled to death. The killer had put her body in the bag and left it there like trash. Again, the police had few clues. They did not know who the killer was. The third body was found on August 30th, 2001. A woman was found floating in the water of Biscayne Bay. Her name was Jessica Good. She was also a prostitute. Unlike the others, she had been stabbed many times. Her boyfriend gave the police some information. He said Jessica had gone to meet a man. The boyfriend described the man as light-skinned Hispanic. She went to meet him and never came back. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. During this time, Roberto was living and working in Miami. He was using prostitutes regularly, just as he had in Brazil. The police did not know his name yet. They did not connect him to the dead women, but they were starting to look for a suspect. When Jessica Good's body was found, the police began to focus on a few possible leads. At some point, Roberto's name came up. He became a suspect in her murder. Before the police could arrest him, Roberto realized he was in danger of being caught. He made a decision to run. He knew that if he went back to Brazil, the United States could not force Brazil to send him back. Brazil does not have an extradition treaty with the U.S. This means an American police officer cannot go to Brazil and bring a suspect back for trial. So Roberto fled. He left Miami and returned to his home country. Back in Brazil, Roberto did not stop his violent behavior. Over the next 5 years, he became a suspect in other crimes against prostitutes there. In 2003, he was suspected of raping a prostitute. But again, he was not arrested. He seemed to keep slipping away from the law. On December 13, 2005, Roberto was flying a small plane called a Cessna 310. He was flying to Argentina. During the flight, he lost control of the aircraft. The plane crashed in a place called Misiones Department in Paraguay. Roberto died instantly in the crash. His body was taken back to his home city in Brazil and buried there. For a time, it seemed like the case was over. The man suspected of killing 3 women in Miami was dead. But the full story was not finished yet. For years after Roberto Wagner Fernandez died in the plane crash, the murders of the 3 women in Miami remained unsolved. The police had suspected him in the death of Jessica Good, but he had fled to Brazil before they could arrest him. When he died, the case seemed to go nowhere. The files on Kim Dietz Livesey, Cia Demas, and Jessica Good sat in boxes. Their families had no answers. Then, in 2011, something changed. Investigators in Florida decided to take another look at the evidence from all 3 crime scenes. They had fingerprint samples that were found on the suitcase, the duffel bag, and other items connected to the murders. Back in 2001, these prints had no match in their system. But by 2011, technology had improved. The police ran the fingerprints through their databases again. This time, they got a match. The prints belonged to Roberto Wagner Fernandez. This was the break they needed. Now they knew the name of the man who had killed these women. Investigators from Florida traveled to Brazil. They wanted to find Fernandez and question him about the murders. They wanted to arrest him and bring him to justice. But when they arrived in Brazil and began asking questions, they received surprising news. They were told that Roberto Wagner Fernandez had died in an airplane crash in Paraguay back in 2005. The American investigators had doubts. They wondered if this was a trick. Could Fernandez have faked his own death to escape prosecution? They asked the Brazilian authorities for permission to dig up his grave and test the remains. They wanted to be sure the body in the ground was really his. At that time, however, they were not allowed to do so. The legal process in Brazil did not permit it. The investigators returned to Florida with nothing new. The case stalled again. Years passed. The case sat waiting for another chance. That chance came in 2018. In Brazil, there was a murder case involving a man from Cuba. That case went through the courts and set a new legal example. It showed a way for police to reopen old cases and use new evidence, even when the suspect was dead. This new legal path gave the Florida investigators hope. They could try again. In 2020, with help from the Brazilian federal police, the American investigators got what they had wanted for almost a decade. They received permission to exhume the body from the grave of Roberto Wagner Fernandez. A team of officials went to the cemetery in his home city in Brazil. They opened the grave and carefully took samples from the remains. These samples were sent to a laboratory for DNA testing. The testing took time. The results had to be compared with DNA from Fernandez's known relatives to confirm the identity. Finally, in 2021, the results came back. The DNA proved without any doubt that the body in the grave was indeed Roberto Wagner Fernandez. He had not faked his death. He had died in the plane crash in 2005. On August 31, 2021, the sheriff of Broward County, a man named Gregory Toney, held a press conference. He stood in front of cameras and reporters and made an official announcement. He told the public that the killer of Kim Dietz Livesey, Sia Demas, and Jessica Good had been identified. It was Roberto Wagner Fernandez. He explained that fingerprints from Fernandez matched all 3 crime scenes. He also confirmed that Fernandez had died in 2005, so he would never face a trial. After the announcement, authorities in both the United States and Brazil began to look deeper into Fernandez's past. They studied his life, his travels, and his history of violence. They said publicly that it was likely he had killed more women than just these 3. They suspected there might be other victims in both countries whose deaths were never linked to him. The case was officially closed, but investigators believed the full truth of his crimes might never be known. In the end, the 3 women were finally given a name for the man who took their lives, but the killer himself never stood in a courtroom to answer for what he did. Story 4. Diego Alexander Ruiz Restrepo was born on March 14, 1990, in Colombia. His mother was only 16 years old when she became pregnant. His father did not stay with the family. Because his mother was so young and alone, Diego was raised by his maternal grandparents. They provided him with a home and helped care for him as he grew up. As a child and teenager, Diego went to school at Colegio Carlos Holmes Trujillo. This school was located in the Agua Blanca district of the city of Cali. After finishing his schooling, he learned a trade and worked as a car mechanic. He held this job for 5 years. It was the longest time he ever stayed in one job. When Diego was 22 years old, he became a Christian. His family was also religious, and in his old neighborhood in Cali, people in the community liked him. They saw him as a normal part of the neighborhood. In 2010, Diego's mother made a big decision. She moved to Chile to find work and a new life. 3 years later, in 2013, Diego followed her. He did not go through the official process to live there. Instead, he entered Chile as a tourist and then stayed, becoming an undocumented immigrant. In Chile, he found different jobs, mostly doing physical work in construction. Diego started a relationship with a woman from Ecuador who was also in Chile. They had a son together, and they named him Andy. For a time, Diego lived with his sister and her husband in an apartment on La Alameda, a big street in the city of Santiago. His brother-in-law later said that Diego had serious problems. He said Diego drank too much alcohol, was quick to become violent, and treated his own sister badly. The violence in Diego's life grew worse. At different times, he used a knife to stab several members of his own family. He stabbed his sister. He stabbed his mother. He also stabbed his grandfather and his stepfather. Because of this, his sister took a legal step to protect herself. She went to court and got a restraining order against him. This meant that by law, he was not allowed to come near her. In the neighborhood where he lived, Diego was known for starting fights and arguments. He would threaten his neighbors, sometimes using a knife or another sharp weapon. This behavior got him into trouble with the law. The police had records of him committing robberies. He was involved in making threats and using knives in fights. Because of this police record, he was never able to get a permanent visa to live in Chile legally. His past actions had closed that door. In early March 2020, Diego Ruiz began a series of violent attacks. On March 7th, a 72-year-old man named Victor Olegario Allende Salas was found dead. Victor suffered from memory loss caused by senile dementia and had a difficult past. Investigators later came to believe this was Diego's first murder, though at the time, his death seemed like an isolated incident. For the next several months, Diego continued living in the Megs neighborhood of Santiago. He remained undocumented and kept to himself in many ways, but his violent behavior did not stop. On the night of October 31st, Diego was drinking with a group of people. Among them was a 35-year-old Colombian immigrant named Carlos Andres Rivas Angulo, who had moved to Chile in 2010. Around 1 o'clock in the morning on November 1st, an argument or some kind of conflict broke out. Diego took out a knife and attacked Carlos, stabbing him approximately 25 times. Carlos died from his wounds. Later that same day, November 1st, another body was found. The victim was Guido Hernan Gallardo Contreras, a 64-year-old homeless man. Guido had no known wife or children, and very little was known about his life. His death at first appeared to be another unfortunate killing of a vulnerable person living on the street. 1 week later, on November 8th, Diego committed his most violent series of attacks. That day, he encountered Luis Marcelo Romero Giria, a 49-year-old man who was homeless and struggled with drug addiction. Diego stabbed and killed him. Soon after, he found Marcia Margot Tapia Lonkin, a 57-year-old woman. She also lived on the streets in the Estacion Central area. She had 2 children but suffered from alcoholism and mental illness. Diego killed her as well. Diego continued his attacks that same day. His next victim was Leonidas Vicente Panes Fierro, a 40-year-old man. Leonidas had grown up in an orphanage after his mother died when he was 8 years old. He had once worked as a police officer, but later became homeless and lived in a tent. He had an ex-wife and 3 children. Diego stabbed and killed him. Later that day, Diego attacked Rodrigo Menino Carmona, a 32-year-old man from Argentina. Rodrigo was born in Mendoza and had moved to Chile in 2016. Diego stabbed him in the neck, and Rodrigo died from the wound. He was buried in Santiago General Cemetery. On that same day, November 8th, Diego also attacked a man named Pedro Manuel Bustamante Babbani. Pedro was 44 years old and homeless. Diego stabbed him at the same time he attacked Leonidas Panes. After stabbing Pedro, Diego also kicked him violently. Pedro was badly hurt, but did not die. He was taken to a hospital where doctors treated his wounds. After he recovered, he went back to living on the streets. Several months earlier, on August 3rd, Diego had threatened another man, identified only as Oscar P. Diego approached him with a knife about 20 centimeters long. He told Oscar that he had killed many people before and suggested he could be next. Oscar was able to get away without being hurt. He reported the threat to the police, the Carabineros de Chile. At the time, the police made a report, but they did not connect this threat to any larger pattern. Diego's method of attack was always similar. He targeted people who were homeless, living on the streets with no one to protect them. He used a knife to stab them, often many times. He attacked them suddenly and without warning. His victims had no chance to defend themselves. On November 8th, his attacks happened very quickly. In just about 70 minutes, he attacked 5 different people. 4 of them died. Only Pedro Bustamante survived. During this time, some evidence was being recorded without anyone realizing its importance right away. Security cameras in the Megs neighborhood captured images of a man walking in certain areas at certain times. The cameras showed the man wearing the same clothing, including a hood, during the weeks when the murders happened. The police would later look back at these images and see that the same person appeared in the footage connected to multiple crime scenes. After Diego Ruiz carried out his attacks on November 8th, the police began to look more closely at the recent deaths in the Meigs neighborhood. A chief investigator named Pamela Contreras was assigned to the case. As she and her team reviewed the evidence, they noticed something important. They looked at security camera footage from the times and places where the murders had occurred. The footage showed a man walking through the area during the 2 weeks when the crimes happened. Investigator Contreras later explained that the police realized they were looking at a person who was repeating a pattern. The man made sequences of walks between different parts of the neighborhood, and these walks were identical each time. The same person kept appearing in the footage near the locations where victims were found. The police studied the images carefully. They could see the clothes the man wore, including a distinctive hood. They used these images to identify him as Diego Ruiz. Once they had his name, they were able to find where he lived. On November 9th, just 1 day after his final attacks, the police arrested Diego for investigation into the murders. After his arrest, the police went to Diego's home. They searched the place where he had been living. Inside, they found the clothes he had worn while committing the crimes. The hood seen in the security camera footage was there. This physical evidence connected him directly to the murder scenes. Days later, Diego was brought before a judge. The judge heard the evidence against him. The judge decided that Diego represented a danger to society and ordered that he be held in custody while the investigation continued. The judge explained that based on the police investigations, Diego had attacked his victims without any reason and with great violence. The victims had no chance to defend themselves, and there was no provocation from them. He was initially charged with 7 murders. While Diego sat in preventive detention at the Special High Security Unit in Santiago, the investigation expanded. Prosecutors looked into other unsolved murders and attacks in the same area. They found patterns that linked Diego to many more deaths. They began investigating his possible involvement in 20 other murders that had occurred over a longer period. One of these was Carlos Núñez Valenzuela, a 46-year-old man who had been stabbed 6 times and killed on April 16, 2018. The public ministry continued looking into these cases, trying to determine if Diego was responsible for these deaths as well. In July 2023, Diego Ruiz Restrepo stood trial for the murders he had been confirmed to commit. The court found him guilty. He was given a sentence of qualified life imprisonment. Under Chilean law, this type of sentence means he must serve a minimum of 40 years in prison before he can be considered for release. For the families of the victims, justice came slowly. Some families, like that of Leonidas Panes, only learned of their relative's death through news reports rather than from any official institution. The victims, most of them homeless and vulnerable, had been forgotten in life, but their deaths finally received attention through the investigation that caught the man who killed them. Diego Ruiz Restrepo remains in prison, serving his sentence for the 7 confirmed murders while investigators continue to examine his possible connection to other deaths. The case is closed, and the man known as the Psychopath of Meigs will spend decades behind bars for the violence he committed against those who had no one to protect them. Story 5. Duane Davis was born in Compton, California, in the early 1960s. Compton is a city near Los Angeles. During Duane's childhood and young adult years, Compton became known for its street gangs. 2 of the most powerful gangs were the Crips and the Bloods. They fought over territory and control of the streets. Growing up in this environment, Duane was surrounded by this world from a very young age. As a teenager, Duane became involved with a specific set of the Crips gang called the Southside Compton Crips. The gang gave him a sense of belonging and power. His life in the gang was not a secret. He was known by his nickname, Keef D. He built a reputation as someone deeply connected to the gang's activities. Over the years, he was involved in various crimes, including drug dealing. This life was dangerous, but it was the only life he knew. By the 1990s, Dwayne was no longer just a regular gang member. He had become a leader and an older figure in the gang. People respected him, and younger members looked up to him. One of these younger members was his own nephew, Orlando Anderson. Orlando was also a member of the South Side Compton Crips. He was young and eager to prove himself within the gang. Dwayne and Orlando were close. Dwayne saw Orlando as part of his extended family and his gang family. In the summer of 1996, a small event happened that would later become very important. Orlando Anderson and some other South Side Crips were at the Lakewood Center Mall, which is also in California. Inside a Foot Locker shoe store, they tried to rob a young man named Trayvon Lane. Trayvon was not a random person. He was associated with a different gang called the Mob Pirates, who were allies of a famous rap music label called Death Row Records. The robbery attempt did not go smoothly, but it created a conflict between Orlando Anderson and Trayvon Lane. This conflict was small at the time, but it planted a seed of anger between two groups of people. Dwayne Davis, back in Compton, likely heard about this incident, but for him, it was just another street dispute. Life in the gang was full of such small conflicts. By September 1996, Dwayne Davis was 53 years old. He was still a powerful figure in the South Side Compton Crips. His nephew Orlando was an active young soldier in the gang. Their lives in Compton continued as normal, not knowing that a small fight in a mall was about to connect them to one of the most famous people in the world. On the night of September 7, 1996, a famous rapper named Tupac Shakur went to the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. He was there to watch a boxing match between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon. He was with a group of people, including the head of his record label, Death Row Records, a man named Marion Suge Knight. After the boxing match ended, they all walked through the lobby of the hotel to leave. In the crowded lobby, one of Suge Knight's associates, a young man named Trayvon Lane, spotted someone he recognized. It was Orlando Anderson, the young man from the South Side Compton Crips who had tried to rob him at the mall months earlier. Trayvon pointed Orlando out to Tupac Shakur. Tupac was known to be loyal to his friends and crew. When he saw Orlando, he decided to confront him. Tupac walked up to Orlando Anderson and asked him if he was from the South, meaning the South Side Compton Crips. Before Orlando could answer, Tupac punched him in the face. Orlando fell to the ground. Then, Tupac and Suge Knight, along with several other men in their group, surrounded Orlando and kicked and punched him. The whole fight was caught on the hotel's security cameras. After a short time, hotel security guards ran over and broke up the fight. Orlando got up and walked away, angry and humiliated. Tupac and his group left the lobby. After the fight, Tupac went back to his hotel room at the Luxor. He changed his clothes. Then, he got into a black BMW sedan with Suge Knight. Suge was driving. They planned to go to a nightclub called Club 662, which was owned by Suge, for a concert. A group of cars carrying their friends and bodyguards followed behind them. Meanwhile, Orlando Anderson did not go home. He was furious about being beaten up in front of so many people. He wanted revenge. He found his uncle, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, who was also in Las Vegas. He told Dwayne what had happened. Dwayne was a respected older figure in the gang. He decided to help his nephew get payback. They got together with two other members of the South Side Compton Crips. Their names were Terrence Brown and DeAndre Smith. The four men got into a white, four-door Cadillac. Terrence was driving. Dwayne was in the front passenger seat. Orlando and DeAndre were in the back seat. They had a gun, a .40 caliber Glock. They began driving around Las Vegas, looking for Tupac Shakur. They knew Tupac was probably going to Suge's club. They drove near the club and waited. After some time, they saw a line of cars leaving the area. They recognized the cars as part of Tupac's convoy. The Cadillac began to follow the black BMW. A few minutes before the shooting, Tupac and Suge's car was pulled over by police officers on Las Vegas Boulevard. The officers stopped them because the music was too loud and the car did not have license plates. The plates were found in the trunk. The officers checked and then let them go without a ticket. This delay changed the timing of everything. The Cadillac, which had been following, caught up to them. At about 11:15 p.m., the black BMW stopped at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. The white Cadillac pulled up on the passenger side of the BMW. The two cars were right next to each other. In the back seat of the Cadillac, one of the men rolled down the window. He quickly fired multiple gunshots into the BMW. Tupac Shakur was hit 4 times. 2 bullets went into his chest, 1 hit his arm, and 1 hit his thigh. Suge Knight was hit in the head by a small piece of metal or glass from the bullets. The Cadillac sped away from the scene. The shooting was over in seconds. Despite being hurt and having a flat tire on the BMW, Suge Knight drove the car away from the intersection. He drove about a mile to another street where police officers pulled him over again. Paramedics were called. They took Tupac and Suge to the University Medical Center. Tupac was still alive, but he was badly hurt. Doctors and nurses worked to save him. He was put on life support machines. In the hospital, he was conscious at times. Police officers tried to ask him who shot him, but he did not give them any names. 6 days later, on September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur died from his injuries. He was 25 years old. Suge Knight was treated at the hospital and released the next day. He told police he did not see who shot them. Many other people who were with Tupac that night also refused to talk to the police. They did not want to cooperate with the investigation. The police had very little information to go on. The 4 men in the white Cadillac, including Dwayne Davis and his nephew Orlando Anderson, went back to California. They did not tell anyone they were responsible for the murder. After the shooting, the Las Vegas police had a difficult job. They wanted to find who killed Tupac Shakur, but almost no one would help them. The people who were with Tupac that night would not talk. They did not trust the police. Suge Knight said he saw nothing. The investigation moved very slowly. For years, the case remained unsolved. It seemed like it might never be solved. In 1998, 2 years after the murder, Orlando Anderson was killed in Compton, California. He was shot and died in a fight that was related to gang activity. He was still a suspect in the Tupac case, but he had never been arrested or formally charged. With his death, many people thought the case was truly over. The police had lost the person they believed was the shooter. But the police did not stop looking for answers. Over the years, they gathered small pieces of information. They heard from people on the street that the shooting was done by the South Side Compton Crips to get revenge for the fight in the hotel lobby. They learned that Dwayne Davis had been in the white Cadillac that night. Dwayne was still alive. He was still living in California. In the years that followed, Dwayne Davis began to talk about the murder. He did not go to the police, but he talked to other people. He gave interviews. In 2018, he appeared in a documentary series about unsolved crimes. On camera, he said he was in the front seat of the white Cadillac the night Tupac was shot. He described who was in the car with him. He named his nephew Orlando, Terrence Brown, and DeAndre Smith. He said he saw the gunfire happen. He did not say he was the shooter, but he admitted to being part of the plan and being present at the crime. These public statements gave police new evidence they did not have before. He had confessed on television. In July 2023, the Las Vegas police started working on the case again. They got a search warrant for a house in Henderson, Nevada, which is near Las Vegas. The house belonged to Dwayne Davis's wife. They were looking for evidence connected to the murder. Then, on the morning of September 29, 2023, they arrested Dwayne Davis. He was taken into custody and charged with murder. He was 60 years old. Duane Davis was not charged with firing the gun. He was charged with helping to plan the murder and for being part of the group that carried it out. The law says that if you help plan a murder or are there when it happens, you can be just as responsible as the person who pulls the trigger. The police used his own words from the documentary and other interviews as key evidence against him. A grand jury listened to the evidence and decided there was enough to put him on trial. After his arrest, Duane Davis was held in jail without the option to pay for his release. In November 2023, he went to court and said he was not guilty of the crime. His trial was scheduled to begin at a later date. While waiting for his murder trial, Duane Davis got into a fight in the jail where he was being held. He was charged in a separate case for this fight. In April 2025, he was found guilty of that separate charge, which was for fighting in prison. In September 2025, he was sentenced to prison for that crime. This meant he was already in prison while still waiting for his murder trial. The murder trial for Duane Davis has been delayed many times. This is common in big cases. It was first set for June 2024, then moved to November 2024. In early 2025, it was delayed again. As of early 2026, the trial for the murder of Tupac Shakur is scheduled to begin in February 2026. Duane Davis remains in prison in Nevada while he waits. For 27 years, the murder of Tupac Shakur was a mystery. Then, a man who was in the car that night talked about what happened, and those words led to his own arrest and the chance for a final answer in a case that had stayed open for so long. Story 6. Andre Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in a small village called Yablokn. This village was in Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union. When he was born, life was very hard. The land and the people were still suffering from a great famine. This famine was caused by the government's decision to take control of all the farms. Andre's parents, Roman and Anna Chikatilo, worked on one of these collective farms. They were very poor and lived in a small hut with only one room. They did not get money for their work. Instead, they were allowed to grow a little food on a small piece of land behind their hut. There was rarely enough food for the family. Andre later said that he did not even eat bread until he was 12 years old. He and his family often had to eat grass and leaves just to stay alive. Andre's mother, Anna, told him a terrible story when he was young. She said that before Andre was born, she had a 4-year-old son named Stepan. According to her, starving neighbors had kidnapped Stepan and eaten him. It was never proven if this story was true, or if a boy named Stepan ever existed. But the story had a deep effect on Andre. He remembered his childhood as a time filled with poverty, hunger, war, and cruel jokes from others. When Andre was 5 years old, the Soviet Union entered World War II. His father, Roman, was called to fight in the army. He was later wounded in battle and captured by the enemy. Between 1941 and 1944, the German army occupied the area where Andre lived. He saw the effects of the war himself. He later described these events as horrors. He remembered bombings, fires, and shootings. He and his mother would hide from the danger in cellars and ditches. At one point, their small hut burned to the ground while they watched. With his father away at war, Andre shared a bed with his mother. Andre wet the bed often. Whenever this happened, his mother would yell at him and beat him. In 1943, Andre's mother gave birth to a baby girl named Tatiana. Andre's father had been gone for 2 years, so he could not be the father. Many Ukrainian women were raped by German soldiers during the war. It is possible that Andre's mother was also a victim of such a crime, and this may have happened while Andre was nearby. In September 1944, at the age of 7, Andre started school. He was a shy boy but very eager to learn and study. He was also physically weak. He wore simple, homemade clothes to school, and his stomach was often swollen because he was still hungry. The hunger was so bad that he sometimes fainted at school or at home. Other children bullied him. They made fun of him because he was small and timid. At home, he and his sister were constantly yelled at by their mother. His sister later remembered that their father was a kind man, but their mother was mean and unforgiving. Despite the problems at home and with other children, Andre did well in school. He loved to read and memorize facts. He studied hard at home. This was partly because he was nearsighted and could not see the blackboard well in class. His teachers thought he was an excellent student and often praised him. As a teenager, Andre continued to be a very good student and became a strong believer in communism. At 14, he was made the editor of his school newspaper. When he was 16, he became the leader of the school's Communist Party student group. He read many books about communism and organized marches. In 1954, he was the only student from his village to finish the final year of school, and he graduated with excellent grades. When Andre reached puberty, he discovered he had a problem. He could not get or keep an erection. This made him feel even more awkward and ashamed. He was very shy around girls. When he was 17, he had a crush on a girl named Lilia, but he was too nervous to ever ask her on a date. That same year, he attacked an 11-year-old friend of his younger sister. He jumped on her and wrestled her to the ground. As the girl struggled, he had an orgasm. After graduating, Andre tried to get a scholarship to Moscow State University. He did well on the entrance exams, but his scores were not high enough to be accepted. He believed he was rejected because his father had been a prisoner of war, which the government sometimes saw as a sign of betrayal. However, the real reason was simply that other students did better. Instead of trying another university, he went to the city of Kursk. He worked as a laborer for a few months before starting a 2-year program at a vocational school to learn how to be a communications technician. While in Kursk, he had his first serious girlfriend. She was 2 years younger than him. They tried to have sex 3 times, but each time, he could not maintain an erection. After 18 months, she ended the relationship. When his training was finished, Andre moved to a city in the Ural Mountains called Nizhny Tagil. He worked on a long-term construction project and also took college courses by mail. He lived and worked there for 2 years. In 1957, he was drafted into the Soviet Army. He served for 3 years. He was first sent to Central Asia to work with border guards. Later, he was assigned to a communications unit in East Berlin. His work record in the army was good, and he joined the Communist Party just before his service ended in 1960. After the army, Andre returned to his home village to live with his parents. He worked with them on the farm for a short time. He soon began a new relationship, this time with a young woman who was divorced. This relationship also lasted only 3 months. Again, he could not perform sexually. After they broke up, the woman asked her friends for advice on how Andre could fix his problem. Soon, almost everyone he knew found out he was impotent. He was overwhelmed with shame. He later said he tried to hang himself, but his mother and some neighbors found him and cut him down. He felt he had to leave the village and never return. In 1961, Andre found a job as a communications engineer in a small town called Rodionovo-Nesvitayskaya. This town was in Russia, about 20 miles north of a larger city called Rostov-on-Don. He moved there and rented a small apartment. That same year, his younger sister Tatiana finished school and came to live with him. Their parents also moved to the area later. Tatiana lived with her brother for 6 months. She noticed that he was very shy around women, but she saw nothing else wrong with him. She decided to help him find a wife. In 1963, Tatiana introduced Andre to a woman named Feodosia Odnikiva. Andre was attracted to her, but the relationship moved very fast. It was almost like an arranged marriage. They met and just 2 weeks later they were married. Andre later said that his sister and her husband made most of the decisions. Andre's sex life with his wife was minimal. He still could not maintain an erection. They agreed that to have children, he would ejaculate outside her body and then push the semen inside her with his fingers. In 1965, his wife gave birth to a daughter named Ludmila. A son, Yuri, was born 4 years later, in 1969. While he was married, Andre continued his education. He enrolled as a student by mail at Rostov University, studying Russian literature and language. He earned his degree in 1970. Shortly after, he got a job managing sports activities for a region. He did this for 1 year. Then, he began a new career as a teacher. He taught Russian language and literature at a vocational school in a nearby mining town called Novoshakhtinsk. Andre was not a good teacher. He knew his subjects, but he could not control his students. They made fun of him and took advantage of his shy nature. One of his jobs at the school was to check on the students who lived in the dorms at night. On several occasions, he went into the girls' dormitory, hoping to see them without their clothes. Other times, he caught adolescent students having sex. Seeing this disturbed him, because it reminded him of what he could not do. In May 1973, Andre committed his first known sexual assault. He was at a swimming area and swam towards a 15-year-old girl. He grabbed her breasts and her genitals. As she struggled, he had an orgasm. Months later, he locked another teenage girl in his classroom. He sexually assaulted her and beat her. Students complained about his behavior. The school director called him to a meeting and told him to quit his job or be fired. Andre quietly left. He found another teaching job in Novoshakhtinsk in January 1974. He lost that job in September 1978 because the school had to cut costs. He then found another teaching position at technical school number 33 in the town of Shakhty. Shakhty was a coal mining town about 47 miles north of Rostov. By the mid-1970s, Andre's desires were becoming stranger. He would loiter near public toilets to spy on young girls. He bought chewing gum to give to young girls he met, trying to gain their trust. He is known to have sexually assaulted at least 3 girls he met this way. Andre's teaching career finally ended for good in March 1981. There were several more complaints from students that he had molested them. That same month, he found a new job that did not involve teaching. He became a supply clerk for a factory in Rostov that made construction materials. This job required him to travel often. He had to go to many different places across the Soviet Union to buy materials or to make deals with suppliers. This job, which allowed him to move around freely, was the job he had when he committed his first murder. In September 1978, Andre Chikatilo moved to the town of Shakhty. He secretly bought an old, rundown hut there. On the evening of December 22nd, he saw a 9-year-old girl named Yelena Zakotnova. She was walking home from an ice skating rink. He approached her and lured her to his hut. Inside, he tried to rape her, but he could not get an erection. When the girl began to struggle and scream, he choked her. He then took out a knife and stabbed her 3 times in the stomach. As he stabbed her, he had an orgasm. He then strangled her until she was unconscious and threw her body into the Grushevka River, which flowed nearby. Her body was found 2 days later under a bridge. Several pieces of evidence pointed to Chikatilo. A witness had seen a man who looked like him talking to the girl at a bus stop. Neighbors had seen him at the hut that evening. Blood was found in the snow near his fence. But the police did not arrest him. Instead, they arrested a different man named Alexander Kravchenko. Kravchenko had a previous conviction for rape and murder. The police pressured witnesses and got a confession from Kravchenko after he was beaten and threatened. He was convicted and, after several trials, was executed for a crime he did not commit. For Chikatilo, killing Yelena had given him a new and powerful feeling. He realized that stabbing and slashing a victim allowed him to become sexually excited and reach orgasm. The urge to feel this again became very strong. For almost 3 years, Chikatilo fought the urge to kill again. He would often cut his business trips short and return home to avoid the temptation. But on September 3, 1981, he gave in. He was leaving a library in Rostov city center when he saw a 17-year-old girl named Larissa Tkachenko standing at a bus stop. He approached her and offered to drink vodka with her in a forest near the Don River. She agreed. When they reached a secluded area, he threw her to the ground and tore off her clothes. He tried to have sex with her, but he could not get an erection. When she protested, he became angry. He forced mud into her mouth to stop her screaming. He then beat her and strangled her to death. He did not have a knife, so he mutilated her body with his teeth and a large stick. He tore off one of her nipples with his teeth. He covered the body with leaves and branches. It was found the next day. 9 months later, on June 12, 1982, Chikatilo was traveling by bus to buy vegetables. He had to change buses in a village called Donkoy. He decided to walk instead. On the road, he met a 13-year-old girl named Lyubov Buryuk. She was walking home from shopping. They walked together for a short distance. When the path was hidden by bushes, he grabbed her and dragged her into the undergrowth. He tore off her dress and stabbed her to death, imitating sex as he did so. He stabbed her 22 times in the head, neck, chest, and pelvic area. Her body was found 15 days later. After this murder, Chikatilo stopped fighting his urges. Between July and September 1982, he killed 5 more people. The victims were between the ages of 9 and 18. He developed a clear pattern. He would go to bus stations or train stations. He would look for children, runaways, or young homeless people. He would approach them and use a trick to gain their trust. He might offer them food or candy, promise to show them a shortcut, or offer to show them rare stamps or coins. He would then lead them to a quiet, secluded place like a forest. Once there, he would overpower them. He often tied their hands behind their backs with rope. He would stuff dirt or mud into their mouths to silence their screams. Then he would kill them with a knife. He would stab and slash them many times. He would cut open their bodies. This would cause him to have an orgasm. With adult women, he often targeted prostitutes or homeless women. He would lure them with promises of alcohol or money. He would try to have sex with them, but when he failed, he would fly into a rage, especially if the woman laughed at him or mocked him. He would then kill them by stabbing and slashing. On December 11, 1982, he got on a bus in Novoshakhtinsk. He saw a 10-year-old girl named Olga Stolmakanok riding home from her piano lesson. He persuaded her to leave the bus with him. A passenger on the bus saw a middle-aged man leading the girl away by the hand. Chikatilo led her to a cornfield on the edge of the city. He stabbed her more than 50 times. He cut open her chest and removed her lower bowel and her uterus. By January 1983, police had found 4 bodies that seemed to be the work of the same killer. A special team of investigators was sent from Moscow to Rostov to lead the search. The operation was called Operation Forest Path. A forensic analyst named Viktor Burakov was put in charge. In April, when Olga Stolmakanok's body was found, Burakov examined the wounds. He saw the cuts on her eye sockets. He knew then that a serial killer was definitely at large. Chikatilo often stabbed or gouged out the eyes of his victims. He later explained that he believed an old superstition that the last image seen by a victim is imprinted on their eyes. Chikatilo continued to kill. In June 1983, he killed a 15-year-old Armenian girl. By September, he had killed 5 more. The number of bodies forced the Soviet government to admit a serial killer was active. They formally linked 6 of the murders to one person. Police had many theories. They thought the killer might be part of a group harvesting organs, or a member of a satanic cult, or a mentally ill person. They focused on checking the alibis of people who had been in mental hospitals or who had been convicted of homosexuality or crimes against children. They created a huge card file system with the names of all possible suspects. The police pressure was intense. Several young men confessed to the murders. These were often men with learning disabilities who confessed only after being brutally interrogated. 3 men, including a known homosexual and a convicted sex offender, killed themselves because of the police tactics. But even as they got these false confessions, more bodies kept appearing. In October 1983, a 19-year-old prostitute was found killed in Shakti. In December, a 14-year-old boy named Sergei Markov was found near Novocherkassk. He had been castrated and stabbed more than 70 times. In early 1984, Chikatilo killed 2 women in Rostov's Park of Aviators. On March 24th, he lured a 10-year-old boy named Dmitry Tashnikov away from a stamp kiosk in Novoshakhtinsk. Several witnesses saw them together and gave police a good description of the man. When the boy's body was found 3 days later, police found a footprint, semen, and saliva on the clothing. On May 25th, he killed a young woman named Tatiana Petrosyan and her 10-year-old daughter, Svetlana. He had known the mother for several years. He killed the mother first, then chased the daughter for nearly half a mile and killed her with a hammer. By the end of July, he had killed 3 more young women and a 13-year-old boy. In the summer of 1984, Chikatilo was very active. On August 2nd, he killed a 16-year-old girl in the Park of Aviators. On August 7th, he killed a 17-year-old girl named Ludmila Alexieva near the Don River. He cut her 39 times and disemboweled her. Hours after this murder, he flew to the city of Tashkent in Uzbekistan for a business trip. While there, he killed an unknown young woman and a 10-year-old girl. When he returned to Rostov, he killed an 11-year-old boy on August 28th and a 24-year-old librarian on September 6th. On September 13th, 1984, Chikatilo was at a bus station in Rostov. 2 undercover detectives noticed him trying to talk to young women. They followed him as he wandered through the city, rubbing against women in crowds. They arrested him at the city's central market. When they searched his bag, they found a large knife, several lengths of rope, and a jar of Vaseline. Police also discovered he was being investigated for stealing from his employer, which allowed them to hold him longer. They took a sample of his blood. The result showed his blood type was A. However, semen samples found on 6 of the recent victims had been typed as AB. Because the blood types did not match, the police believed he could not be the killer. His name was added to the card file, but he was largely ruled out. He was found guilty of stealing from his job and sentenced to 1 year in prison. He was released after serving only 3 months on December 12, 1984. After his release, Chikatilo found a new job at a locomotive factory in Novocherkassk. He was careful and stayed out of trouble. He did not kill again for almost a year. On August 1st, 1985, he was on a business trip to Moscow. At a railway platform near an airport, he met an 18-year-old woman named Natalia Poklostova. He lured her off a train and into some woods. He bound her, stabbed her 38 times, and strangled her. For weeks later, he killed another young woman in Shakti. The investigation continued. In November 1985, a new prosecutor named Isa Kostoyev was put in charge. Police reinvestigated all the known murders. They also, for the first time in the Soviet Union, asked a psychiatrist for help. A doctor named Alexander Buchanovsky was given all the files on the murders. He created a 65-page profile of the killer. He described him as a man aged 45 to 50, well-educated, likely married with children, but a sadist who was impotent. He said the man's work probably required him to travel, which explained why the murders happened in different places on weekdays. Chikatilo followed the news about the manhunt closely. For almost a year after August 1985, he did not kill anyone in the Rostov area. In 1987, he killed 3 times, but all were far away from Rostov. A 12-year-old boy in the Ural Mountains, another 12-year-old boy in Ukraine, and a 16-year-old boy near Leningrad. None of these murders were linked to the Rostov investigation. In 1988, he killed 3 more people. In April, he killed an unknown woman in a town called Krasny Sulin. In May, he killed a 9-year-old boy in Ukraine. In July, he killed a 15-year-old boy named Yevgeny Muratov near Shakhty. This murder was linked to the investigation, but the body was not found until April 1989. On February 28, 1989, Chikatilo killed a 16-year-old girl named Tatiana Rizova. He killed her inside his own daughter's apartment, which was empty at the time. He cut her body into pieces and hid them in a sewer. Because the body was dismembered, police did not connect it to the other murders. Between May and August 1989, he killed 4 more victims. By 1990, public and political pressure to catch the killer was intense. The media was now freer to report on the case, and the stories caused widespread fear. On January 14, 1990, Chikatilo lured an 11-year-old boy named Andrei Kravchenko away from a theater in Shakhty. The boy's stabbed and castrated body was found the next month. On March 7th, he lured a 10-year-old boy from a Rostov train station to the city's botanical gardens. The boy's body was found the next day, missing his tongue and sexual organs. In April, he killed a 31-year-old woman. In July, he killed a 13-year-old boy. In August, he killed an 11-year-old boy. Police decided on a new plan. They noticed that many bodies were found near small train stations along a single railway line. They flooded the large stations with uniformed police, hoping to scare the killer away from them. At the 3 smallest stations on that line, they placed only undercover officers. The plan was to force the killer to strike at one of these small stations where the undercover officers could see him. The operation began on October 27, 1990. On October 30th, just 3 days after the operation started, police found the body of a 16-year-old boy at one of these small stations, Donlaskaz. He had been stabbed, strangled, and castrated. The boy had actually been killed on October 17th, before the operation began. That same day, Chikatilo killed another 16-year-old boy at a different small station. The body was found a few days later. On November 6, 1990, Chikatilo killed for the last time. The victim was a 22-year-old homeless woman named Svetlana Karostik. He killed her in the woods near Donlaskaz station. After killing her, he returned to the train platform. An undercover officer named Igor Rybakov was there. He saw Chikatilo wash his hands and face at a well. He noticed that Chikatilo's coat had grass and dirt on the elbows. He had a small red smear on his cheek and a deep cut on his finger. He was dressed in a suit, not like someone gathering mushrooms, which was the only reason people went into the woods that time of year. Officer Rybakov stopped him, checked his papers, and let him go. He filed a report with the name of the man he had stopped. On November 13, 1990, police found the body of Svetlana Karostik in the woods near Donlaskaz station. She was the 38th victim that had been linked to the same killer. Investigators immediately asked for the reports from the undercover officers who had been watching the small stations. They wanted the names of every man stopped and questioned in the previous week. When they looked through the reports, one name stood out. It was Andrei Chikatilo. The name was familiar to several officers. They remembered that he had been arrested in 1984 as a suspect. His name was also on a master list of possible suspects that had been sent to police departments across the Soviet Union in 1987. Now they had a reason to look at him again. Investigators went to his present employer and his past employers. They checked his work records and travel dates. They discovered that he had been in the exact towns and cities where many of the victims had disappeared. They also talked to people who had worked with him when he was a teacher. These former colleagues told the police that Chikatilo had been forced to leave 2 teaching jobs because students had complained about his lewd behavior and sexual assaults. On November 14, 1990, police placed Chikatilo under surveillance. They watched him for 6 days. They saw how he acted in public. On trains and buses, he would approach young women or children and try to start conversations. If one person walked away, he would wait a few minutes and then try again with someone else. On November 20th, after 6 days of watching him, the police decided it was time to act. Chikatilo left his home that day carrying a large jar. He stopped at a small kiosk in a park and filled the jar with beer. He then walked around the city of Novocherkassk, trying to make contact with children he saw. When he came out of a cafe, for plainclothes police officers moved in and arrested him. He did not fight back. They put him in handcuffs and placed him in an unmarked car. At the police station, Chikatilo was searched. The officers found a folding knife and 2 lengths of rope in his belongings. They also saw a deep wound on one of his fingers. He had treated the wound himself with iodine, but he had never seen a doctor for it. A medical examiner later said this type of wound was caused by a human bite. At the crime scene of his second-to-last victim, a 16-year-old boy named Viktor Tishchenko, police had found signs of a fierce struggle. The boy had fought hard for his life. A sample of Chikatilo's blood was taken for testing. He was placed in a cell at the KGB headquarters in Rostov. The police put another man in the cell with him. This man was a police informer. His job was to talk to Chikatilo and try to get him to say something about the murders. The next day, November 21st, a prosecutor named Isa Kostoyev began formally questioning Chikatilo. The police knew that most of their evidence against him was circumstantial. Under Soviet law, they could only hold a suspect for 10 days before they had to either charge him or let him go. They needed a confession. Their strategy was to make Chikatilo believe he was a very sick man who needed medical help. They hoped this would make him confess, so he could avoid prison and go to a hospital instead. On that same day, the results of Chikatilo's blood test came back. It showed his blood type was A. This was the same result as in 1984, but investigators now understood something they had not known before. The semen samples found on the victims had been typed as AB. They realized that a person's blood type can be different from their semen type. Chikatilo's blood was type A, but his semen was type AB. This meant he could be the killer after all. They took a sample of his semen to confirm this, and the test showed they were correct. The blood type evidence that had cleared him in 1984 was now evidence against him. For more than a week, Chikatilo denied killing anyone. He did admit to molesting some of his students when he was a teacher. He also wrote essays for Kostoyev. These writings showed signs of mental disturbance that matched the profile written by the psychiatrist years earlier, but he would not confess to murder. The informer in his cell reported that Chikatilo complained about Kostoyev's aggressive questioning style. On November 29th, the 10th and final day they could hold him without charges, the police asked Dr. Alexander Buchanovsky, the psychiatrist who had written the profile, to help. Dr. Buchanovsky went to the interrogation room. He sat with Chikatilo and began to read parts of his 65-page psychological profile out loud. The profile described the killer's thoughts and feelings in detail. As Chikatilo listened, he began to cry. After 2 hours, he admitted to Dr. Buchanovsky that he was guilty. He said he was ready to confess to the police. The next morning, November 30th, Kostoyev began questioning Chikatilo again. This time, Chikatilo confessed to 36 murders. These were all the killings that police had linked to their investigation. He described each murder in detail. He told them how he approached the victims, what tricks he used, where he killed them, and what he did to their bodies. He could draw sketches of the crime scenes. He remembered small details that only the real killer could know. He told them about a 19-year-old girl he had killed in 1984. He remembered that as he fought with her, she had yelled that a man named Bars would get him for this. Police checked their records. The girl's fiancé had the nickname Bars tattooed on his hand. Over the next several days, Chikatilo confessed to 20 more killings. These were murders that police had not linked to the case. Some had happened outside the Rostov region. Some of the bodies had never been found. One was the murder of Yelena Zakitnova in 1978, the 9-year-old girl for whom another man had been executed. Chikatilo led police to the remains of some victims. In December 1990, he took them to a cemetery in Shakhty and showed them where he had buried the body of a 10-year-old boy named Alexei Kobatov. This proved beyond any doubt that he was the killer. In total, Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders. 3 of the bodies could not be found, and 3 victims could not be identified. He was formally charged with 53 murders of women and children between 1978 and 1990. He was also charged with 5 counts of sexual assault from his teaching years. In August 1991, Chikatilo was sent to the Serbsky Institute in Moscow. This was a famous center for psychiatric evaluation. He stayed there for 60 days. A senior psychiatrist named Andrei Tkachenko examined him. He found that Chikatilo had a borderline personality disorder with sadistic features. But he concluded that Chikatilo knew what he was doing was wrong and was legally sane. He was fit to stand trial. Chikatilo's trial began in Rostov on April 14, 1992. It was held in courtroom number 5 of the Rostov Provincial Court. The judge was Leonid Akubzanov. Because of the anger from the victims' families, a special iron cage was built in the corner of the courtroom to hold Chikatilo and protect him from attack. The trial was the first major media event in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Newspapers printed sensational stories about the maniac and the cannibal. The first 2 days were spent with the judge reading the long list of charges. Each of the 53 murders was read out loud. In the courtroom, relatives of the victims cried and fainted when they heard the details of how their loved ones died. When the judge asked Chikatilo to identify himself, he did so calmly. But as the trial went on, his behavior became strange and difficult. He would shout at the judge, give long rambling speeches, and complain that he was being treated unfairly. Sometimes he would sing Soviet songs. Other times he would expose himself to the court. When he became too disruptive, he was taken back to his cell while the trial continued without him. On April 21st, Chikatilo stopped answering any questions. He refused to speak to the judge, the prosecutor, or his own lawyer for 3 days. The trial was then paused for 2 weeks. When it resumed in May, Chikatilo withdrew his confessions to 6 of the murders. His lawyer tried to argue that he was insane and should be evaluated again, but the judge refused. In July, Dr. Buchanovsky was finally allowed to testify. He explained to the court the psychological profile he had created in 1985. He also described his conversations with Chikatilo that led to the confession. Psychiatrists from the Serbsky Institute also testified. They said that Chikatilo's behavior in the courtroom was an act. In his cell, he was calm and rational. They believed he was faking insanity to try to avoid punishment. In August, the lawyers gave their closing arguments. Chikatilo's lawyer asked the judge to find him not guilty, arguing that such terrible crimes could only be committed by an insane person. The prosecutor argued that Chikatilo knew his actions were criminal and had taken many steps to avoid being caught. He asked for the death penalty. On October 14, 1992, the court met to hear the verdict. The judge found Chikatilo guilty of 52 of the 53 murders. He was cleared of 1 murder due to lack of evidence. He was also found guilty of the 5 sexual assaults. The judge sentenced him to death for each murder. When Chikatilo heard the sentence, He kicked a bench across his cage and began shouting abuse. But when the judge asked if he wanted to make a final statement, he sat in silence. Chikatilo was taken to Novocherkassk prison to wait for his execution. He filed an appeal against his conviction. In the summer of 1993, the Supreme Court of Russia rejected his appeal. They also ruled that there was not enough evidence to prove his guilt in 9 of the murders, but he remained convicted of 52 killings. He then filed a final appeal for mercy with the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. This appeal was rejected on January 4, 1994. On February 14, 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was taken from his cell to a small, soundproofed room inside the prison. He was executed with a single gunshot to the back of the head. He was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere inside the prison cemetery, and the exact location was not recorded. Story 7. Marcelo Costa de Andrade was born on January 2, 1967. He was born in a poor part of Brazil. When he was very young, he lived for a time in a big community of small houses called a favela. The name of this favela was Rocinha, and it was in Rio de Janeiro. His mother worked as a maid. She worked hard cleaning other people's houses. Her husband, Marcelo's father, was not a good man. He was violent and often hurt her. The home was not a safe or happy place for a child. Because life was so difficult at home, Marcelo's mother sent him away. He went to live with his grandparents in a different part of Brazil called Serra. He stayed there for some time. When he came back to Rio de Janeiro, things were even worse. His parents had separated. They both had new partners. These new people in his life did not treat him well. They were mean to him and hurt him. During this very difficult time, something terrible happened to Marcelo. An older man sexually abused him. This was a traumatic event that deeply affected him, even though he was just a child. After this, he was sent to a special school for boys. It was a kind of boarding school where he could live and study. Marcelo did not do well in his classes. He had trouble learning. The other boys at the school were cruel to him. They called him names like retarded. He felt alone and different. The school only kept boys until they turned 14 years old. When Marcelo reached that age, he had to leave. He had nowhere to go and no one to take care of him. He was all alone on the streets. To survive, he began to sell his body for money. This is called prostitution. He said that during these acts, he was always the one in control, the active one. But then, one time, an older man forced him to be the passive partner. This experience disturbed him very much. It brought back bad memories and made him feel terrible. He felt so much despair that he tried to kill himself. Not long after, he was caught and sent to an institution for young people called Phoebum. It was like a jail for troubled youth. He stayed there for a few months, but then he escaped. Once he was free, he went back to prostitution to get money to live. When Marcelo was 16 years old, his life changed a little. He met a man named Antonio Batista Freire. Antonio was also homosexual. He invited Marcelo to come and live with him. For a while, Marcelo had a home and someone who cared for him. Antonio even took him to a church. It was called the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. Even though he had a home with Antonio, Marcelo continued to go back to the streets and prostitute himself. He did not stop this behavior. Eventually, he and Antonio separated. Marcelo decided to go back to live with his family. This time, he tried to live a normal life. He stopped prostituting himself. He got a formal job, which meant he worked legally and got paid regularly. He helped his family by giving them money for bills and helping with chores around the house. For about 10 years, he went to services at the Universal Church. He also watched their celebrations on television every day. While at church, he heard a preacher say something that stuck in his mind. The preacher said that when children die, they go to heaven. Marcelo thought about this a lot. In his mind, He decided that it would be a bad thing to kill an adult. He believed adults might go to hell if they died. He did not want to send anyone to hell. His life was a mix of different things. He would read the teachings from his church's bishop, but he also read pornographic magazines. He enjoyed listening to music by Suxa, a famous children's TV host, and other singers that children liked. His mother noticed one strange thing about him. He had a habit of playing a tape, recording over and over. It was a recording of his own brother crying. This was his life. He was a grown man in his early 20s, living with his family, going to work, attending church, but also carrying the heavy weight of a painful and confusing past. In April 1991, Marcelo was coming home from his job. He was walking and saw a young boy selling sweets on the street to make money. Marcelo approached him. He used a trick. He told the boy that he would give him some money if the boy would help him with a special religious ritual. The boy agreed and went with Marcelo to a place with thick bushes, away from other people. Once they were alone, Marcelo tried to force the boy to have sex. The boy did not want to and tried to fight back. He resisted. Marcelo became angry and violent. He picked up some stones and hit the boy with them until he was quiet and stopped moving. Then he raped the boy. After it was over, he realized the boy was dead. This was his first murder. He later said that after this, he felt like he could not stop himself from doing it again. His second murder happened not long after. The victim was an 11-year-old boy named Anderson Gomez Goulart. Marcelo used the same trick to get the boy alone. He promised money for helping with a ritual. He took Anderson to a remote place. This time, he used a large stone to beat the boy on the head, killing him. Then he did a very strange thing. He took a bowl and collected some of the boy's blood. Later, he drank it. Over the next several months, Marcelo continued to kill. He would ride buses around the cities of Niterói and Itaboraí, looking for young boys who were alone. He looked for poor boys, often ones who were selling things or begging on the streets. He believed these boys would be easy to trick. His method was always the same. He would approach them in a friendly way. He would offer them a small amount of money, like 3,000 cruzeros, which was not a lot. He would tell them he needed their help for a Catholic ritual. The boys, hoping to get the money, would go with him. He would take them to deserted places. Sometimes it was a field, sometimes a beach area, or a patch of forest. There, he would try to rape them. If they cried out or tried to fight, he would strangle them with his hands. He would squeeze their necks until they were dead. He told police later that he would squeeze their throats to make sure their soul went to heaven. He believed he was doing them a favor by sending them to heaven while they were still children. In total, between April and December of 1991, Marcelo killed 14 boys this way. On December 16, 1991, he met his last two victims. They were brothers. The older brother was 10-year-old Altair Medeiros de Abreu. His younger brother was Ivan, who was even smaller. The two boys were walking near the central station in Niterói. They were on their way to a neighbor's house for lunch. Marcelo saw them and walked over. He spoke to Altair, the older one. He offered them money to help him with a religious ritual. The boys agreed and went with him. They all got on a bus together. Marcelo took them to a quiet, empty beach near a big bridge. Once they were alone, Marcelo tried to kiss the older boy, Altair. Altair got scared and tried to run away. Marcelo caught him and knocked him to the ground. Altair was stunned and scared, but he was still awake. He lay there and watched as Marcelo took his little brother, Ivan, and raped him. After the rape, Marcelo strangled Ivan until he was dead. Then, Marcelo turned back to Altair. He told Altair that his brother was just sleeping. Altair was terrified. He was too scared to run or fight. He did everything Marcelo told him to do. Marcelo took him to a gas station to clean up. The man working there saw them, but did not ask any questions. That night, Marcelo and Altair slept hidden in some bushes. The next morning, they went to Rio de Janeiro together. During the trip, Marcelo told Altair that he could come and live with him. Altair, who was afraid for his life, agreed to anything Marcelo said. Marcelo had to go to his job to get some papers to hand out. While Marcelo was busy and not looking right at him, Altair saw his chance. He turned and ran away as fast as he could. He escaped from the killer. Altair was too scared to tell his family what had happened at first. He only told them that his brother Ivan was missing. The next day, he finally told his older sisters the whole story. He told them about the man, the beach, and what he had seen happen to Ivan. Marcelo did not try to run or hide after Altair escaped. In fact, he went back to the beach where he had left Ivan's body. He moved the body, changing its position. Hours later, the police found Ivan's body on the beach. When they examined him, they saw his hands were inside his shorts. This made them think he did not drown. They soon found out he had been sexually abused and strangled. When the police showed Ivan's mother his body, she was heartbroken. Altair was with her. He told his mother that he knew who did this. He told her about the man. Altair then led the police directly to Marcelo Costa de Andrade. When the police found him and confronted him, Marcelo did not act surprised. He did not try to lie or deny it. He calmly confessed to killing Ivan right there. After Altair led the police to him, Marcelo was taken to the police station. He was calm and did not seem worried. Right away, he confessed to killing Ivan. But then, without anyone asking him to, he started talking about other boys. He told the police that Ivan was not the only one. He said he had killed many others. At the station, Marcelo gave a full confession. He admitted to killing 13 other boys besides Ivan. This made a total of 14 victims. He told the police who some of them were and where he had left their bodies. He explained his method in a flat, emotionless voice. He described how he would trick them with the promise of money for a religious ritual. He explained how he would strangle them after raping them. He even repeated his belief that he was sending their souls to heaven. One of the first crimes he described in detail was from June 1991. He said he saw an 11-year-old boy named Oder Jose Muniz dos Santos begging for money on the street. He used the same trick and took the boy to a soccer field. He tried to rape him, but when he had trouble, he strangled him. He told the police that he strangled him a second time to be sure his soul went to heaven. He then went home for dinner. Later that night, he came back and cut off the boy's head. He said he did this because of the abuse he suffered as a child at the boarding school. The police listened to his confessions. They then had to investigate if what he said was true. They went to the places Marcelo described. In those remote fields and forests, they began to find the bodies of young boys. Some bodies were in places so hidden they might never have been found. The police were able to identify many of the victims. They were all boys between the ages of 6 and 14. They were all from poor families in the areas around Niterói and Itaboraí. Marcelo was charged with 14 murders. The case was very clear because of his full confession and the physical evidence of the bodies. However, during the legal process, a question arose about his mental state. Doctors and psychiatrists were brought in to examine him. They evaluated his mind and his history. They looked at his traumatic childhood, his strange beliefs about sending children to heaven, and his lack of emotion when describing the killings. Their conclusion was that Marcelo Costa de Andrade was not legally responsible for his actions. He suffered from a serious mental illness. The court agreed with this finding. He was declared insane. This meant he could not be sent to a normal prison. Instead, he was ordered to be placed in a secure mental hospital for treatment. Marcelo was sent to the Enrique Roxo Psychiatric Hospital. This is a facility for people who have committed crimes but are considered mentally ill. He did not receive a sentence with a set number of years. Instead, his confinement was for an indefinite period. He would stay in the hospital until the doctors decided he was no longer a danger to society. For the families of the 14 boys, the justice system provided a resolution but it did not bring their sons back. They had to live with the loss. Altair, the boy who escaped, had to live with the memory of what he saw happen to his little brother. He was the one who led the police to Marcelo, and his actions stopped any more boys from being killed. Marcelo Costa de Andrade remained in the psychiatric hospital. Years later, he was still there. He had become known as one of Brazil's most notorious killers, but because of his mental state, he was a patient, not a prisoner. He lived out his life in the institution, a place far removed from the streets where he once roamed, looking for boys to kill. The case was closed, but the story left a permanent mark on all the families who lost a child. Story 8. Moses Sithole was born on November 17, 1964 in a place called Vaslores. Vaslores is a township near the city of Alberton, in what was then the Transvaal province of South Africa. His family was poor, and life was hard from the very beginning. When Moses was only 5 years old, his father died. Not long after that, his mother left the family. She abandoned Moses and his brothers and sisters. Because they had no parents to care for them, the children were sent to live in an orphanage. They would stay there for the next 3 years. Life in the orphanage was not good. Later in his life, Moses would say that he and his siblings were treated badly there. He did not give many details, but he made it clear that it was a painful time for him. After those 3 years, he left the orphanage, but the experience stayed with him. He carried the anger and hurt from that time into his teenage years and beyond. As a teenager, Moses got into serious trouble with the law. He was arrested and charged with rape. He was found guilty of this crime and was sent to prison. He would spend the next 7 years of his life behind bars. This was a very long time for a young person. He went into prison as a teenager and came out as an adult. Instead of learning to change his ways, he later claimed that his time in prison made him worse. He said that the experience hardened him and filled him with a deep need for revenge. He blamed the women he said had falsely accused him of rape for putting him in that situation. He held on to this anger for many years. After he was released from prison, Moses had to find a way to live in society again. To the people who met him, he did not seem like a dangerous person. He appeared normal and mild-mannered. He started an organization. He called it Youth Against Human Abuse. The name of the group suggested that its goal was to help children and stop them from being hurt. On the surface, it looked like a charity, and Moses presented himself as a man who wanted to do good. But the organization was not real. It was a front, a way to meet people and gain their trust without them knowing who he really was or what he had done in the past. In 1994, Moses Sithole began to act on the anger he had carried since his time in prison. He used his fake charity, Youth Against Human Abuse, as a tool to find the women he would hurt. He would look for young women who were looking for work. He offered them job interviews. Because he presented himself as someone who ran a charity, the women trusted him. They did not know he was a convicted rapist. They did not know he had spent years in prison. They only saw a man who seemed to be offering them a chance at employment. The first murder happened on July 16, 1994. The victim was an 18-year-old woman named Marina Moni Monama. Sithole would follow the same pattern with many of his victims. He would arrange to meet them in a public place. Then he would take them to a remote field or an isolated area. He would tell them this was where the job was, or where the interview would continue. Once they were alone and far from help, he would attack them. He beat them. He raped them. Then he killed them. His method of killing was often to strangle them with their own underwear. After the murder, he would leave their body in the field and simply walk away. Over the next several months, Sithole continued this pattern. His victims were almost all young women. One of them, Amanda Kibofile, was actually in a relationship with him at the time. He killed her on August 6, 1994. He did not stop. He moved from one town to another, committing murders in different places. The police later noticed that his crimes seemed to happen in three main areas: Atarajevo, Boxburg, and Cleveland. Because of this, the case became known as the ABC murders. On April 20th, 1995, Sithole committed a crime that was different from the others. He met a woman named Letta Namthandazone Blangamandla. She was 25 years old. When she went to meet Sithole, she brought her 2-year-old son, Sibusiso, with her. Sithole attacked Letta and killed her. Then, he turned on the little boy. He hit Sibusiso in the head, causing a bad wound. He did not kill the child directly. Instead, he left the toddler alone in the remote field, hurt and unable to find help. The little boy died from being exposed to the cold and the elements. This showed that Sithole was willing to hurt anyone, even a very young child, to cover his crimes. As the number of victims grew, people in South Africa became very scared. Women were afraid to go to job interviews alone. Families waited anxiously when their daughters went to look for work. By mid-1995, Sithole had killed more than 30 women. The panic spread across the country. The situation became so serious that the president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, went to Boxburg himself. He spoke to the public and asked for their help in finding the person responsible for the murders. During this time, Sithole did something strange. He would sometimes call the families of the women he had killed. He did not ask for money. He did not try to hide. He called them just to say cruel things. He taunted them about what had happened to their loved ones. This showed that he took pleasure in their pain and wanted to cause more suffering, even after the murder was done. In August 1995, the police started to get closer. They learned that a woman had been seen with a man matching Sithole's description before she disappeared. They began to look into him. When they dug into his past, they found his previous conviction for rape. As soon as Sithole found out that the police were asking questions about him, he ran. He disappeared and went into hiding. But he did not stop completely. In October 1995, he contacted a journalist named Tamsin de Beer. He told her on the phone that he was the killer the police were looking for. He said he had killed 76 women, which was twice as many as the police knew about at that time. To prove he was telling the truth, he gave her directions to a place where one of the bodies was hidden. The police were now hunting for him, and he was playing a dangerous game by talking to the press. After Moses Sithole contacted the journalist Tamsin de Beer in October 1995, the police were able to use the information she gave them. He had told her where one of the bodies was hidden. When the police went to that location, they found the body. This confirmed that the man on the phone was truly the killer they were hunting. Now they knew for certain who they were looking for, and that he was still in the area. The police moved quickly to find him. They tracked him down to a location in Johannesburg. When they found him, Sithole did not surrender peacefully. He attacked one of the police officers with a hatchet. He swung the weapon at the constable, trying to cause serious harm. To stop the attack and protect the officer, other police on the scene shot Sithole. He was wounded and fell to the ground. He was taken to a hospital to be treated for his gunshot wound. While he was in the hospital, doctors ran tests on him. The tests showed that Moses Sithole was HIV positive. He also tested positive for tuberculosis, or TB. These medical findings were noted by the authorities, but they did not change the course of justice. Once he was well enough, he was taken to court to face charges for his crimes. The trial took place at the Pretoria High Court. One of the most important witnesses was Tamsin de Beer, the journalist. She was called to court by a subpoena, which is a legal order that requires a person to come and testify. She told the court about her phone conversations with Sithole, including how he had claimed responsibility for the murders and had directed her to the body. Her testimony helped the court understand the full scope of what he had done. On December 5, 1997, the judge, Justice David Kurlowis, delivered the sentence. Sithole was found guilty of 38 counts of murder. For each murder, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He was found guilty of 40 counts of rape. For each rape, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. He was also found guilty of 6 counts of robbery. For each robbery, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The judge ruled that all of these sentences would run consecutively. This means they would not happen at the same time. One sentence would finish, and then the next one would begin. When all the years were added together, his total sentence was 2,410 years in prison. The judge also explained what this meant in practical terms. He ordered that Sithole must serve at least 930 years of that sentence before he could even be considered for parole. Parole is when a prisoner is released early under supervision. Because of this ruling, Sithole would not be eligible for parole until he was 963 years old. The judge told him directly that if the death penalty were still legal in South Africa at that time, he would have been sentenced to death. After the trial, Sithole was sent to prison. He was first held in the CMAX section of Pretoria Central Prison. This is the maximum security unit for the most dangerous criminals. Later, he was moved to the Mangung Correctional Center in Bloemfontein. He remains in that prison today. For the families of the victims, the trial brought some closure, but it did not bring back their loved ones. The 38 women and the toddler, Sibusiso, could not be returned. The families were left to live with their loss. Moses Sithole, the man who had used a fake charity to find and kill so many people, would spend the rest of his life locked away, never again free to hurt anyone else.